Welcome to the University of East Anglia here in Norwich in the UK, where it's 12 o'clock and we're kicking off the webinar for The Secret Power of Brands. And with us we have over on the far end Peter Schmidt-Hansen, my UEA colleague who helps teach this course. And then really excitingly, we've got two of the students on the course. We just started a couple of weeks ago, Kevin and Jennifer, who are going to help answer questions. And thank you very much for all the questions that you've sent in, probably more than we'll have time to answer, actually, but we'll do our best. And let's start with Michael Casey O'Shea, who asks, how can brand grow from claiming unique benefits to creating communities based on shared value? So this idea that really successful brands have brand communities. Peter, what do you feel about brand communities?
I think brand communities are tremendously important because it gives people a way of engaging not only with the brand but also friends, family and other members. And I think when you look at the history of branding, it was at one time branding made our lives better through providing products. Now brands make our lives better through experiences, and it's these experiences you get from communities. And of course, tech these days allows communities to develop and grow much quicker. You know, we're all communicating with each other. We're all connected. So communities, whether real or virtual, are much easier to put together than they were in the past.
Mm. Kevin, are you a member of any brand communities?
I would say I'm part of the Apple community.
Ah, right.
Okay.
Okay, that's both of you. Okay. So what does it mean to be in a community as opposed to just being a customer of Apple?
I think it's a type of recognition as well. And I think from a social perspective, we recognize each other as being part of the community.
So we just had a little moment of bonding here because we're all Apple.
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
And we share these values and
yeah, I think that's important. I think there's something about what the company is either standing for or what they say they're standing for, and then you kind of grab onto it, and that is something that you either want represented by yourself or you think, yeah, that's me, oh, Apple's innovative. Well, I think I'm innovative,
Okay. So you're signing up to a set of values as opposed to just buying a product.
I think so. I think sometimes you also, well, especially with the Apple versus Android, that's such a huge debate. Are you an Apple person or are you Android? That's just such a huge difference.
But again, I think that harks back to this connectivity issue, because people who are Apple advocates, they are more easily connected than someone who's an Apple and an Android. The actual connectivity is getting better, but it's not as good as it has been between Apple, for example. But I think also another thing about community is that not all brands are suitable for communities. I think if you take something like Harley Davidson, there's a fantastic community about that, based on virtual and real get-togethers. But I can't really imagine the same happening for, let's say, a toilet cleaner. Something like that.
Okay. Although there are people who are fans of Method, aren't there? The eco-friendly cleaning product.
Yeah.
So I guess it can happen. I guess it can happen on potentially on anything. I just wonder whether the word community, though, is a bit strong, really, because yes, we are Apple people, three of us anyway, and we have some shared values about that. But is it really a community? A village is a community. A university campus is a community. Is Apple a community in the same way?
I think it's an artificial construct. I think it's that inviting belonging, but it's not real. It's just kind of
more being a fan of what the company stands for and its products.
Okay. So maybe a fan rather than a community. Yeah. Okay. So Michael, I hope that's answered your question a little bit. I mean, the thing about branding is there's rarely a neat answer to any question, is there? I think every question opens up many more, but we've had a good exploration of that. Thanks very much for asking that question. Now, Marine Dabegan asks what to do if a brand launch is a failure and the brand has a negative image already in its first stage. Peter, can you think of any brand launches that were immediate failures, and what would you do about it?
Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I can't immediately think of one, but I think what you've got to do is look at why it was a failure. And if it's a product or a service which is not fit for purpose and it doesn't actually meet the customer's expectations, quite clearly then there's a big problem, because at the heart of any good brand, any great brand, is the product or the service. No matter what communication you have, it actually counts for nothing if the product or service is not good. So I think you've really got to look at why it's a failure. If it's a product or service, you've got to take remedial action for that. If it's a problem with the communication, that you haven't actually told the customers enough about this brand, or the profile, or the level of awareness is rather low, it's much easier to remedy perhaps, because then you can actually take action through PR, through advertising maybe, through other marketing activities to try and grab that awareness. So it really depends on what the failure's been, I think.
Exactly what the failure is. Jennifer, have you got any tips for a disastrous brand launch?
I was actually thinking while Peter was talking, is it that the brand launch is disastrous, or maybe that the result wasn't as positive as the person intended?
Right.
I don't know if it can be a failure. I think that maybe the failure is in that you thought it would communicate farther, or be more immediately picked up than it would be actual failure. Because I don't think it would just a flop. I think it would just be that it wasn't as successful as you imagined.
Right, so you maybe set your sights too high in a way, yes. Kevin, what would you say to someone suffering from an apparent failure?
Marcus' question is that a brand, I think, takes time. You cannot launch a brand.
Right.
You launch a product, you launch a service,
Yes.
and you have your visual identity that might fail. And people do not like that, or the product, its specifications, but the brand, that takes time. And your brand at the product launch is negative, and not the brand and what you stand for necessarily.
That's a very good point. So it plays out over time, which is a little bit your point, which is unrealistic to have expectations of a brand on day one.
Right.
You could have expectations of a product sales on day one, but a brand on day one would be pushing it. And it's a good point, because the big failure I can think of, which actually oddly enough we'll probably talk about in class later on, was when in Wolverhampton, where I work, we launched the London 2012 Olympics brand. This is nearly 10 years ago now, and everybody hated it. It was a huge disaster. It was attacked in the media day after day after day after day. But to your point, Kevin, it was the launch of a logo. That was what was judged. It wasn't the launch of a brand. And when the brand played out in 2012, the games themselves and everything around that the logo stood for became visible. People loved it. It all worked. So there is a danger in launching a logo and imagining that's the same thing as launching a brand, and then getting worried that you've not got the positivity that you were hoping for, because it might just come through later on when people start to see the reality that the brand stands for. Really good question, Marie. That's really got us thinking, actually. What are kind of failures that we've known?
And I think also, I mean, in terms of failures, it depends whether it's a launch of a completely new standalone brand, or whether it is a launch within a brand family. Of course, you know, because if you look at something like Virgin, everything is branded Virgin, and they might actually launch a new service or a new product or a new sub-brand. But it's got the Virgin identity, and if it just completely jars with everything that Virgin stands for, then it's a different sort of failure from something which is a completely new startup, for example.
Very good point. Okay, so we have a question from Godwin Iancho Inhenamwa, I hope I pronounced that roughly correctly. Why is so much emphasis placed on colour and logo when creating the brand? Jennifer, what do you think? Colour and logo.
I think that a lot of times the color and the logo is part of the spirit of the brand that you're going to be creating. So I remember in the course that there were certain colors represent certain things. So red is like passion, and yellow is happiness. So you want to go with the color that you think that right at the core of your business is. And then the logo, just something that would help it be memorable when somebody sees it, that immediate association with your company. I think it's really important to have a good logo.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you stop and think about it, why is it that every brand seems to have a logo and colours, and maybe they don't need them? And what do you think? And why this visual thing so important?
There's also a certain aspect that comes with the company's price and quality. For example, if you look at Ryanair and IKEA, they have yellow and blue, and they stand for cheap but quality. And Rad, Coca-Cola, Virgin, is very powerful, is high quality. So that is also embodied then in the logo. And then, as Jennifer said, the emotions, the core values that you stand for.
So colours create expectations for customers. Yeah. Why do they do that though, Peter? Why is colour such a powerful trigger?
It's part of our cultural heritage. You know, if you look at the use of colour and what it actually means within a society, within a culture, it varies across the globe. You know, in some countries, for example, the colour of mourning and death is black, but in others it's white. So it is very much based on a cultural history. And that's sort of passed down through generations and generations. And it's very important for global brands in particular to recognise this, because otherwise there's dangers that they might fall short and have an inappropriate meaning in one country or another. I mean, coming back to your point about why our logo is so important, it's because it's a shortcut to a series of associations. You know, that we have the golden arches from McDonald's, and that equals burgers, Happy Meals perhaps, and so on. So it's easily recognisable, and it creates perhaps a memory which might be pleasant, it might be fun for kids or whatever. So it is really, the logo is a shortcut to a series of associations which the brand hopes are going to be positive.
And I guess there's a lot of the decisions that we make as consumers in relation to brands are not really rationally thought through. They're intuitive or kind of pre-rational things, and maybe colours and logos are a good way of triggering that. They kind of bypass the rational brain, don't they? And they kind of go straight to your intuition or your emotions, and act in a different way from a slogan, for instance.
Yeah, I think also we tend in low involvement situations where we're not thinking about what we're buying too much. I mean, I'm actually a very lazy shopper. You know, I go into a supermarket and I want to get out as quickly as possible. So I'm just looking for these brands or these symbols, these packs that I recognise, because I want to get in and out as quickly as possible. You know, so it helps us. You know, it's a shortcut not only to a series of associations, but a shortcut to get out of the supermarket.
I'm totally with you. The shorter the stay, the better for me. But so colour absolutely has a practical role there. So let's keep going through the questions. We are 13 minutes through, so we're nearly halfway through the webinar. Nikos Dikas asks, how is the process of rebranding an existing company or organisation connected to the change of the enterprise itself? Is a new identity enough to create success when the product itself remains the same? It's a good question, Nikos. Jennifer, what do you think? Change the logo, keep the product the same. Is that going to work?
No, I don't. I think that everything goes back to the product. So you have, from the reading that we were doing, you can only go so far back as the history of your product. So if within your brand, whatever your history is, you can't really redefine it if you're going to keep within the same, I think, like, consumer base.
I think that a lot of rebranding that has been done in the past is more related to marketing, as you said, changing the logo. But as you said, it all comes back to your product. Marketing is very short-term orientated. If you want to change something in the long term, you need to look at the brand itself, what it stands for, and is that being communicated through your product.
I agree. I think like you can make a huge short-term impact. You can get some more customers, but if your product doesn't match the quality or the marketing efforts, whatever you're doing, I think that people are going to eventually see through it, and there could be a backlash.
So it could be worse than not doing it at all, in a way.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely. I mean, people actually rebrand for a whole series of reasons. One of them is fashion, that actually fashion changes, colors change, and so on. I mean, when you think about clothing, when you think about cars, design and so on, it changes all the time. So sometimes a logo has to change to keep in fashion. Obviously, when you do change a logo, it can create a big backlash. There's a very famous case a few years ago where Gap changed their logo, and there was an online backlash from the design community who said that the redesign was very lazy and actually didn't do anything. But then you can look at other rebrands, such as what was British Petroleum, BP. They rebranded from BP to BP, but BP, instead of standing for British Petroleum, now stood for Beyond Petroleum. And what in that rebrand, they were trying to communicate a vision for the BP brand, that actually they were going to go beyond fossil fuels and look at other types of energy, such as solar, such as wind, such as water power, and so on. And I think, in many respects, that was, for that brand at the time, quite sensible to do that, because it was trying to signal to all the stakeholders that actually we're not just focused on petroleum, we're not just based upon oil or fossil fuels, but we are actually a forward-looking company which is looking at the wider energy picture in the world. And of course, when you look at the logo as well, it was in the shape of a flower and so on. It's a bit cliched, but I think they were, in their own honest way, trying to signal to the stakeholders and employees that, yes, we are a company which is not just based on oil.
Yeah, and one of our clients sometimes uses the phrase that a rebrand should be a symbol of change and not a change of symbol.
Yes.
The danger, I think, and BP must have found this, is when that signal of change is overambitious.
Yeah.
Because, of course, BP is still almost entirely about oil and gas.
Yeah.
So the statement of intent was great, but it was beyond what the beyond what the company was able to do.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous business sometimes, rebranding.
Oh, it is, yeah. Because I mean, we were just talking in the previous question how important logos and colours are. But if you actually start changing these logos, colours, people perhaps don't recognise it. And also, we've got to remember that brands belong to us. We own the brands that we buy, in a sense. And actually, if we haven't been consulted, or we feel that they're messing with my brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have a question from Renzo Tasso, who says, my question is, do you have any tips for selling a branding idea to your client? So I suppose this is about selling any idea, really. We've all tried to do that in various different ways in our lives. So Jennifer, what's your top tip for selling an idea to somebody?
I think that you'll have to do your research, and you have to know who your client is and what they want, so that you can kind of target your idea appropriately on what they're about underneath, and then just tailor it so that it's not too far outside of what they are willing to do.
Rather than assuming that just because you're excited about it, they're going to be.
Yeah.
You have to find out what's in their world.
Especially how adventurous they are. You might have a great idea, but it might be too unconventional. Like you were telling us about staying within the realm of being, conventional.
So know your audience is your tip. Kevin, what do you?
For me, it's all about passion.
Okay.
And why you want to do something. If someone talks about, I want to start a company, and the why is, I want to make money, you will fail. It needs to come from the inside, and your passion to make a change and to make something happen. And okay, you need to know your audience and know if it's feasible or not. But if you don't have a passion, then in the long term, I think.
So why does your passion make me buy your idea?
I think that's also enthusiasm and the way you bring it. I think that if you're very enthusiastic and very passionate, you will pull people with you.
It's infectious. Yeah. Okay. Great. Peter.
Yeah, I think it's also about providing a little bit of evidence. That if you've got an idea and you've been working for a client and you come up with this idea, it's important to test that idea with various audiences before you actually present it, just to find out whether you've actually covered everything as you think you might have covered it. So there is that thing about providing evidence. The difficulty now comes is that we're living in such a fast-changing world that if you spend too much time gathering evidence, then time is just ticking by. You know, and you get this dilemma, really. You know, do you go extinct by instinct, or do you suffer from paralysis by analysis? You know.
Right. So okay.
You know, so you need a bit of evidence there, but you know, so you partly give the what I think Kevin was talking about, not only the enthusiasm but the confidence that this is the right idea.
And the evidence thing is tricky, isn't it? Because consumers, if you go and ask them, will tend to favour things that are already familiar to them. So something new may not get a good. And of course, Apple famously, in theory, I don't know whether this is true, but in theory, doesn't do market research. It believes that it knows the customer and where the customer is going. So it is tricky. And Wally Olins, who was one of the founders of Wolf Olins, the company where I work, used to say to clients, you have to have the courage of our convictions. In other words, he used to sell ideas just by the force of his own very strong personality. And I think that worked 20 years ago. It really doesn't work in business now. And people do want evidence, they want data of one sort or another.
But I think, I'm sorry,
no,
I was just going to say, but of course, in a way, the evidence could be a track record that we have been working with clients for 10, 15, 20 years, and here are our success stories. You know, and I think really one of the things that brands need to do is to tell stories. We're going to cover this in class tomorrow, by the way. So it's about storytelling, and if you look at, you know, if you are a brand agency, actually showcasing the success leads to new clients buying into your brand agency because they think they're going to get a very good service and they're going to be part of that success.
And I think if I was, this is a really good point, Peter, I think if I was completely honest, I would say that selling an idea is probably 70% passion and enthusiasm and storytelling and all of those things, and only 30% facts and evidence and science and data, because probably, actually, if an idea is a really new idea, there isn't in the end not going to be the evidence that would completely support it. There might be evidence that would make you feel a little bit less scared about going for it, but and you're right, and it depends on who the audience is, doesn't it? If our client is a firm of engineers, let's say, they will want a lot of data.
Yes.
If they are a media business, they will want a lot of storytelling. So it depends on the kind of business that they are. Good question, Renzo. Thank you very much for that. Now we have a question from Linda Lanson, who asks, I'd be interested to hear opinions on whether different factors need to be considered when branding a service compared to branding a product. That's a really good distinction, service and product. Do they come to much the same thing in the end, Kevin, or are they very different, do you think?
One thing that you need to keep in mind when branding a service is that the person buying into it or buying it will be present. A product, you bring it home or whatever you do with it, but a service, you will be present. And so the people providing that service are your brand ambassadors as well. And that is way less with products, which I think can also be a lot more influenced by marketing rather than the service can.
Right. Okay, that's a really important distinction. Peter, what would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just picking up on Kevin's point there, you know, a service is a brand experience, and the frontline people who are providing that experience, as you said, be the brand ambassadors, and they've got to be really trained up and supported to provide that correct level of service. Brand services are really important at the point of delivery. I think what's interesting is that in the past, many product-based brands have provided just that product. But these days, they need to provide products plus some sort of experience. You know, we're living very much in an experience economy. So when you look at this touched on many of the questions we had earlier, you know, such as community and so on. Brands now provide product brands not only provide a product, but also provide an extra on top of that. It might be community, it might be interaction, it might be discussion, it might be fun, it might be other sort of levels of support which come into the arena of service.
Jennifer, what do you think? Product, services, very different worlds?
I think they're similar, but you know, exactly what Kevin said, that if you have a service, you have to make sure the person who's delivering that service is going to make a good experience, because that is something that can impact your consumer. If you have a box of cereal they take home and pretty much tastes the same most of the time, but if you're at an airline and the person who is, you know, there, who's giving you a bad experience, that might change your mind in the future of flying that airline.
And it is interesting, and you made the point, Peter, that at least some products are becoming more like services, aren't they?
Yes.
And it's interesting with the more that cars become computers, basically, a Tesla car, apparently, you get a software update. It's like being an Apple customer. So you don't just buy the car and that's it. You have a constant relationship with Tesla because they're constantly updating your software, and it feels more like a service than and I think particularly for car companies, they're really keen to get into the service world, because the product world could be limited for them if the habit of everybody buying a car dies out and people instead share cars, which appears to be happening more and more in cities. So the only way that you can carry on making money is to have a service which keeps you in a relationship with a customer, where you can keep on, and maybe you buy your car on a subscription rather than a sale price. But
And I think also there is another distinction here with service. The service can be personalised very, very quickly. You know, if, for example, like a hairdresser, and my goodness, I need a haircut at the moment, so I'll be going to a hairdresser soon. The hairdresser can then talk to me about my interests and so on, but the client that comes after me might have a different set of interests, and the hairdresser will customise and personalise that service to that person's needs. So there's a much higher degree of personalisation possible with services than there is with products. But even that is coming now with products. You know, we're talking about cars. You know, if I wanted to go and get a car painted the same stripe as my shirt, I could do it. And relatively speaking, it's relatively cheap these days compared to what it was in the past. So there is more personalisation.
We've got 3 minutes left, and we've got 2 questions that have come in, both on the same subject: place branding. So from Felix Lossio and Sylvia Vella, I think that is. Place branding, city branding, big topic at the moment. I'll start with you, Peter, just briefly. It's a different thing from corporate, from product branding, isn't it?
It is different. In some ways it's similar in that there are a lot of stakeholders, but the stakeholders are far more diverse in city or place branding. You know, you've got the citizens, you've got inward investors, you've got exporters, you've got the governments. So there's a lot of different stakeholders in there, and they might all require a slightly different way of communicating the brand message. The brand message might be the same, but they might need different ways of communicating it, and it is very complex. Yes.
Who does it well, Kevin? Do you think? Who does place branding well? Does the Netherlands, your home country, is that a strong country brand, do you think?
I don't know, to be honest, in the way that we try to brand ourselves. I think that it differs per stakeholder. I think that if you compare it to product branding, an employee might look at it different as a buyer. And if you do place branding, I think you need to pick a stakeholder or a set of stakeholders when you want to do it. So otherwise it will be too different.
So you go for tourists, or you go for businesses, or you go for students, but you're clear about who you know. Jen, what do you think? Your home brand is New York State, isn't it? Rochester.
Yes, it is. Well, I think that you could probably target a bunch of different stakeholders. I think you have to target a bunch of people, but like Peter was saying, the message has to be the same, and then you just emphasize it in different ways depending on who you are targeting at that point.
Okay, so similar principles, but a much more complicated set of
Yeah.
stakeholders. Great, fantastic. Well, we're at 1:30, so we're 30 minutes through the end of our time. Just worth saying right at the end, Jennifer, you did the Secret Power of Brands course a couple of years ago, yes?
I did. So everybody's watching. I was sitting kind of where you were watching the webinar similar to this, and I finished up the course and I loved it. And so I researched it and I said, you know what? I'm going to apply, see if I can get in, and here I am, and it's wonderful.
And you've completed the circle in a way.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Jennifer, thank you very much. Kevin, thank you very much. Peter,
Thank you.
And that's our 30 minutes.